Welcome back to Jack's Corner, where truth and reality have a seat at the table. Now let's get started with this bombshell. We do have a race problem in this country, and it's not white. When was the last time anyone accused someone of color of racism? Well, we all know that it exists, so why isn't it talked about? You know, 85% of black murders are caused by other blacks. Moreover, most of the accusations of racism comes from white liberals. If you can think deeply enough, you just might start asking the right questions that lead to answers. For those of you who have kids, you have probably experienced the occasion when one of them gets caught doing something wrong, and they axiomatically blame it on the other sibling. Yet some of us never grow out of that. Some of us never grow up. Studies have shown that liberals are the true racist and have their biggest issues and biases with blacks and Asians. So their strange betrayal of their own ethnicity in calling other whites racist is a distraction of their own guilt. They are frauds. I really shouldn't have to tell you that. Those on the left are frauds as they display it daily, folks. But too many of us never impose any punishment upon those pathological liars. Liberal whites feign a concern about white supremacy, a narrative they created, and racism against people of color so as to hide who really are the racists. And it's them. Think again. They sacrifice nothing, but in the meantime, they gain political office and power and persecute other imbecilic whites while ignoring the profound racism that exists among all sorts of people of color. In fact, it has been to the liberal whites' great personal gain to create within the black culture a sense of entitlement and anger towards whites. After all, it keeps the black vote with the white frauds, that is, the Democrats. Yep, the very same party responsible for slavery, the Jim Crow laws, the KKK, segregation, and the list goes on, yet most never connect the dots. Yeah, the wrong child gets the blame here, but we are not dealing with children anymore, but rather adult criminals who incite riots, conflict, and violence. Now, one of the biggest stories in the news is growing socialism and communism in the United States, and it is all on the Democrat side. In fact, the race card is used by those who are authoritarian in nature, that is, socialists, communists, and the like, because it is the wedge issue. This is nothing new, folks. For those who know their history and have paid attention, this was part of the strategy by China and Russia for the last 60 plus years to cause instability in this country. And race was a wedge issue. Now, knowing, as we should, that this was a political plot and design, why is there a race issue in our politics today? Well, you might quickly say that I just gave you the answer and that it is the liberal whites, but they would only be the secondary cause. The real cause is because uninformed and lazy whites gave the left, and that is the liberals and the Democrats, the power to destroy the country with race division. Regular, normal, so-called common sense people became wrongly concerned as to what others might think of them, particularly the white liberals and leftists, when they were falsely and libelously accusing others of racism. They insanely gave a word power that it should have never had. It's just a word, folks. It's the toxic toleration of the normal whites that have caused the problem. I'm not dismissing the liberal whites of any responsibility. They should be castigated, shunned, ostracized, and removed from any positions of authority or influence in this country. But folks, hear me out. By now, we should know that these devils on the left and what they do, they are liars and the worst of the worst. It is expected. So the problem lies with the rest of us, the normal so-called common sense white Americans, in fact, whites around the world that are simply passive, indifferent, and just don't want to be bothered or interrupted from enjoying their comforts and conveniences. As an attorney, I always go to the source, that is the heart of the issue. And when it comes to the race issue, the main problem is with those wrongly accused of being racist because they allow it, they tolerate it. The blowback from the innocents should be so intense and severe that the accusers should never see the light of day again. They are the destroyers of society. This is not just a problem in this country, whether in Sweden or Denmark, the Netherlands, England, France, or Italy, it's all the same. The crime rate skyrockets among people of color, but if you point that out and you point those facts out, the left will call you racist. Now, you see how you can get rid of the problem? Just don't let the word racist bother you. And really, why should that even matter to you if they call you that? The word should have zero power, yet most white give it power that it should not have. We could wipe out racism overnight if we made it a felony to ever use that word again. And with that, the Democrats would start disappearing from the political scene because they wouldn't have anything to talk about. And they certainly don't have any good ideas. So again, I ask you, where is the nasty little demon amongst us that keeps us from having an honest discussion about race? Well, I'll give you the short answer first, and it's liberal whites who have been absorbed into and are infected with an atheistic and socialistic attitude or belief system. But before we're ever going to solve the problem, we have to deal with the white demons amongst us. But before I go much further on that, I want to point out some other examples of black racism and black race hustlers that white liberals are all too happy to push forward to do their political dirty work. Once we level the playing field and people of color start becoming the target of racist allegations and truthful racist allegations, then the tide will start to change. But so far they've been immune. And if they're not being charged with racism, then what do they have to worry about? We're the ones that are always on the defensive. But let me give you an example of how the white liberals have appropriated black race hustlers to keep the race pot stirred and to keep it stirred up. To start with, how about this real winner? This longtime race hustler, Jasmine Crockett, recently claimed in the murder of that white teenage football player Austin Metcalf in Texas, he was murdered by a belligerent black 17-year-old by a stabbing in the heart. And Crockett said that the knife that black kid used to kill Austin Metcalf was not a deadly weapon. Seriously? Then she deflected. She said that black women experience more agony than Austin's family in the loss of their son. Now, this is where she should have been removed from Congress. Pictured here is the murderer who had a typical entitlement attitude, and it started a confrontation, and he used deadly force, killing the white teenager Austin. Now, as I said, and this is the good news, this black racist congresswoman from Texas, Jasmine Crockett, she's been redistricted out of her district. However, prior to that, she has helped make decisions for the whole country, and they are all largely racist-based. And then she just rubber-stamped everything that was liberal and basically perverted. Just think about what she said about the murder weapon used on Austin. She said it was not deadly. Well, it was enough to kill Austin, but that just goes to show you what is allowed in the halls of Congress. It is also a sad commentary on the intellectual level of so many in this country who elect people like Crockett. It's a criminal attitude and a profound incompetence, just like the black representative from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, who is on videotape claiming that islands float. Imagine that. But he gets voted into Congress. And you wonder why we have all the problems we have, and you wonder why there's so much spending, and you wonder why there's an affordability problem. It's because you have idiots like this. And truly, folks, they are reflective of their constituents. But moving on, Crockett should be expelled from Congress now, and we shouldn't have to wait until November. You see, folks, you must stop tolerating this kind of criminality, and I'm not talking about the black convicted murderer Anthony Carmelo who murdered Austin, but rather the black race-hustling congresswoman from Texas who will never stand up for justice. And let's not leave out the rest of the liberal Democrats. It's simply not within Crockett's nor many of her ethnicity's ability, with the exception of a handful of black conservative representatives who all scream racism at every opportunity. That is what the Democrat liberals taught them to do. But that's not the real problem. Again, the real problem is regular Americans, whites, tolerating the white liberal. The rantings of entitled blacks is a sideshow, so don't get distracted. Let me remind you, and many who are probably too young to remember this, but the trial, and some will, but remember this, but the trial of OJ Simpson, the famous football star who used a knife to kill his wife, his white wife, and a white man that was staying in his guest house. The evidence was overwhelming, but the blacks on the jury did not want him convicted. They did what was called jury nullification because the trial was turned into a referendum on race. It was black against white. Simpson went free, and there was no accountability for the double murder. The jury nullification in that case was so roundly condemned across the nation that the name of OJ Simpson became synonymous with injustice. However, whites today continue to toxically tolerate and ignore the fact that until we start talking about black racism or racism coming from people of all sorts of colors, this will continue to be a fake problem to which there is no solution. In the meantime, billions of dollars, divisiveness and strife will tear away at the country while filling the pockets of Democrats, just as we have just seen in the Medicare fraud in Minnesota to the tune of $9 billion. Folks, that's your money, and you dare to complain about affordability and then vote for Democrats that made it that way? Let me once again repeat and remind you, black racism is a major problem, but even bigger is the white liberal and leftists who stoke the flames of division because it benefits them. And I really don't have to remind you of this, but I will, because you already know that this is all coming from the Democrat Party. From before the Civil War to today, the Democrats have been a destructive force to our republic, and from the very beginning have used race as a divisive tool. But if we peel the onion back just one more layer, we will find the true source of the race problem, and that is whites who tolerate it. Good men doing nothing. See how patently evil the left is, as well as those infected with the mental illness of psychosis? The black slaves of white liberals are going crazy, screaming racism and white privilege. But let's pause here. Stop one moment. It's the white teenager, Austin Metcalf, who's dead. You see how easy it was for Crockett to divert what was really the injustice here? The death of a white teenager by a black teenager, and nobody wants to talk about the black teenager and the crime that he committed. The powers of evil have taken the attention away from the real crime and the tragedy of Austin's death and turned it into a low IQ, simpleton slaves so easily controlled by their demonic masters. White liberals desperate to seize and keep power. That's who they are, and that's who's pushing this. And that's who support people like Jasmine Crockett. They are the arsonists of society, and normal common sense Americans need to take to the streets as they are over in Ireland right now. And they need to take back America from this insidious, totalitarian, and tyrannical mental disease that only has power over the rest of us because we have tolerated it. It's time for some radical intolerance and to return to reality. Okay, now let's do some quick drive-bys from recent headlines. First one I want to deal with is the plot that was just uncovered by the FBI to attack the White House by a group whose members from 4 different states were going to converge on D.C. and try to create a race war by taking out as many attendees at the UFC fight at the White House. This was a mix of race and anti-Semitism. You can trace this all back to the rhetoric of the Democrats on race and their hatred for Israel. I keep telling you about the Civil War 2.0, and if you don't wake up to the glaring potential outbreak of violence and the consequences that could spread to a wider civil unrest and the economic devastation that would result, then your suffering will be great. Well, now here's another one. Rosie O'Donnell loves to keep herself in the news, and she made herself famous after Trump won the election by moving to Ireland. But I think it had more to do with her facelift surgery than it had to do with Trump. But she always likes to stoke those flames. Her whole existence surrounds around calling people racist, homophobic, and un-American if they don't agree with her. There's nothing talented about this evil witch who is so psychotic. She is on a drugstore of medications, and the best way to deal with people like this is to deny them a platform. So you have to boycott anything they do from which they derive any type of income. Well, now here's another headline. And here again, you have Senator Moulton of Massachusetts back in the news again, giving us an example of why he should be charged with treason. Not only has he called for the United States to cut and run from the conflict in Iran, but now he claims that the agreement to end the conflict is a surrender document. In the time he's been in the Senate, he's done nothing to curtail Iran's nuclear ambitions, nor their terrorist attacks killing thousands of Americans. You see, the Democrats can only criticize because they have no ideas. And if they're not complaining about racism or homophobia or Islamophobia, they have nothing to say. And if you ask them for any solutions, they suddenly go silent. Then we have Senator Mark Kelly, who claims that Trump's policies in Iran are a failure. Yet he doesn't have anything to say nor mention about how we got rid of their military, we got rid of their Air Force, we got rid of their Navy, we got rid of their defense systems, and bankrupted them from being able to build a nuclear bomb or continue terrorist activities around the world. So my question is, well, what has Democrat Senator Mark Kelly done? What has he done with regards to Iran and curbing that violence and curbing that threat that we've lived with for 47 years that was created by another Democrat, Jimmy Carter? Once again, another Democrat liberal, leftist, and communist has no solutions. Now, another item in the news is we have our border czar, Tom Homan, who has revealed that those illegal aliens that are being removed from the country, 64% of them have criminal convictions. Yet you see the Democrats and also paid protesters around the country trying to block ICE from doing its job. How much longer will Americans tolerate Democrats making our streets unsafe by blocking the deportation of these criminals? And let's not forget that the Democrats are the ones that are preventing the passage of the SAVE Act, which requires everyone to have a voter ID in order to vote. How much clearer can it be that the Democrats can only win if they cheat? Over 85% of the people in this country are in favor of the SAVE Act, which includes a majority of Democrats, Independents, and Republicans in favor of the passage of this act. And that spreads, that is across the entire spectrum. But yet the communist Democrats in Congress will block it because that is the only way they can stay in power. So where is the revolution when you need one? If one broke out, or if the Civil War we are actually in gets hot, then if normal Americans don't win, the left will take you out. I know their type, and they are a murderous and desperate group of people. Watch them protest on the streets. Listen to their insanity on TV, particularly the Hollywood types. Again, how do you deal with all of this? Well, you stop enabling the left. Take away their platforms and their money. And how do you do this? Well, you boycott them and their sponsors. Divorce yourselves from family and friends and associations that support Democrats. These are all anti-Americans, and they threaten your safety. Now, I want to move on to something that's very related, but it's pretty profound because this is from Malcolm X. He was a black guy that was very controversial back in the 60s, and he made some very astute observations. Now, here is a very logical summary and recitation of Malcolm X's observations by Jason Lamar. Now, while I don't subscribe to either of these men's worldview, I do have to acknowledge the truth when it's spoken, regardless who speaks it. Malcolm X warned black people to beware of liberals. Now imagine that. This is back in the 60s. Malcolm X warned you to be aware of liberals. He told you that they were cunning, deceitful, and he was right. It was the liberals who killed the black man's spirit by convincing him that he was still oppressed. It was the liberals who turned the white man against each other by telling them they're all inherently racist and privileged. It was the liberals who convinced women to make themselves undesirable by selling them promiscuity and misandry packaged as feminism. They told the transformers that their delusions are reality. The liberals told the fat people that it was self-hate to try to lose weight. They told the sad people that they were sick and poor and that they were victims of the rich, because the liberals provide a unique form of self-sabotage disguised as compassion and social justice. It is the liberals who have created a society full of helpless, entitled people who are convinced that anyone who disagrees with them or so much as questions their ideologies, they're a Nazi and deserve to die. And that is by design, folks. Now, here's one last topic that I want to address, and this is by another influencer, Taco Talks, but it's also been approached and discussed by more and more Christian ministers and pastors, and that is you cannot be a liberal and claim to be a Christian at the same time. Now, don't hear what I'm not saying, because what I'm not saying is that being a Republican automatically makes you a Christian or anything that aligns with that. Because as you've heard me say many times before, I'm an equal opportunity criticizer and I go after both. What I'm actually expressing to you is that if you're a Christian, and that means in regards to voting and politics, you have to be voting based on biblical principles. Therefore, you cannot be voting in opposition to biblical principles. You're supposed to be voting based on morality that we get exclusively from the Bible. So, for example, if you are claiming that you are a Christian, it is not possible for that to be an objectively true claim while you were voting for the mutilation of children. You cannot be in support of dismembering babies inside their mother's womb and pretend to be a Christian. If you're in support of dismantling the Second Amendment and removing the right of self-defense and the tools thereof, then you were basically voting in opposition to a biblical principle that the Bible encourages and actually says that self-defense is a good and righteous thing. David was praising God for training him for war. If you're voting for massively higher taxes, that is in opposition to a biblical principle that specifically mentions that we cannot overtax or be overtaxed, as that is an evil thing. It's robbing a man of his wages. Now, there are certain things in the middle of that you could have a more basically liberal perspective on. For example, if you think that we should be using more of the money that we are appropriately collecting to help, say, homeless people and stuff like that, then that's totally fine. You can have those perspectives and still be a Christian, but you cannot be in favor of dismantling the nuclear family and still be calling yourself a Christian. This is going to make a lot of people very mad, but the only people that it's going to make mad are the ones who need to actually repent of the sins that they're currently committing. Whenever it comes to how they're viewing politics, politics matters, and we're supposed to be engaged in the world, and we need to do it from a biblical perspective with biblical principles. Okay, well, that will do us for today. That's a lot to digest, and once again, you must get involved. If you wait until it begins to hurt, then it's too late. So don't do that with your country, and don't do that with your children. So until next time, I'm Jack Richardson for Jack's Corner.